Hello? Rescue hooks to rescue, Mayday! Get ahead, West. Bad Mayday, what's your location? Get the hell out of here, hurry up! We need radio silence, I need water in that 2.5 inch line. 48 inch water in a 2.5 inch line. Mayday, to the road, to the road. 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear.
Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Emergency Traffic Podcast, where we explore firefighter line of duty deaths and the circumstances around them from published reports. This episode is about the line of duty death of 2 volunteer firefighters in Evanston, Wyoming that occurred in April of 2005 at a multi-family house fire while searching for 2 missing children. This is another one of those incidents that could happen anywhere to any one of us. A typical bread and butter response that, due to a few factors, construction, weather, staffing, communications, and standard operating procedures, turned into a deadly event for our brothers. I encourage you to listen and learn about this incident to prevent it from recurring. Now, I will bring in my co-host, Denis, and after a quick review of an FDNY tip and some current fire service events, we will go to rural Wyoming and learn about this double line of duty death. Hey there, Denis. How you doing today?
Great, Paul. How are you? It's the Muppet Show again.
Yeah, I know. Waldorf and Statler. Yeah. How you liking that white stuff out your window there? I see you got some snow.
So 2 guys in the gallery. I'm the grumpy one on the right because the last 30 hours we had nonstop snow and we got a whole lot of the white stuff on the ground. And yeah, poor man's fertilizer, enough already.
Yeah, we got it a couple of weeks ago. I was teaching a course with Dennis Jones, who appeared on the podcast once. I tried to get him to participate today, but he was busy doing other stuff. And anyway, we were in St. Albert, and we got like a foot and a bit of snow over a couple of days. It was crazy. I only had 6 inches here at home, so.
If you want to live in the Great White North, you got to.
Yeah, and it's all gone now, by the way. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, and it's plus 17 or something out today. It's supposed to rain.
Even your iggy melted, I guess, eh?
Yeah, everything's melted. It's good. Well, let's see. Doug and Dirk are busy, and Dennis are busy, so the retired guys are spending time doing the podcast here. First of all, we started this year, FDNY Tips. They do a tip book, and they published it, so we're going to read one of the tips that sort of applies to this event today. So, tip number 13 talks about fire extension via recesses into cockloft space of frame buildings. So, properly checking for fire extension is imperative during fire operations. Many fires occur in older structures that contain numerous voids, shafts, and other paths of potential extension. Physically opening a wall, floor, or ceiling may be necessary. The thermal imaging camera may not be able to detect heat due to various renovations, multiple ceilings, insulation, masonry, added above wood floors, etc. So yeah, remember, a thermal imaging camera only reads surface temperature. So if there's insulation between the two, then it's not going to read what's going on behind there. And this is something I've encouraged for years: is don't be shy, don't be afraid to cut a small hole in the floor of a closet or poke a hole in a wall somewhere. I mean, it's easy, it's cheap to fix it, and it tells you what you've got, what you're dealing with. Same with the ceiling. You walk into a commercial structure that's got ceiling tiles, the first thing you do is take a New York hook or a pike pole and poke up a couple of ceiling tiles so you can see what's over your head. This is what the Charlotte, North Carolina guys didn't do in the furniture store that would have revealed a raging fire above the ceiling. When we were first selling them, we used to offer tick training. That was part of the deal. A good friend of mine, he's down at FDIC. It's on this week. I saw a picture of him last night, and he's Manfred Keene. He's the Bullard guy for Canada, and he goes all over the world doing training, and he writes articles for firefighting in Canada. Learn how to use your thermal imaging camera for sure. Anyway, this tip goes on to say waste pipe recesses exist wherever kitchen or bathrooms exist. Their presence may be picked up by the first floor roof firefighter who noticed the locations of the exposed waste pipe vents atop a roof, which would line up with the fire below. If the pipe is not hot to the touch, a top floor examination is required and notification made to the officer or incident commander. Steel is often used to provide stability to many large non-fireproof buildings. Steel columns are erected vertically from the foundation to the cockloft. Their locations vary, and at times they are difficult to find. They are often located in voids behind closets. Our main concern is that they're not fire stopped. This provides a chimney effect for fire travel from the first floor to all apartments above and to the cocklofts. These vertical rods, about 1 foot square, they just to provide support, may be larger when the void is built to include the waste and water pipes. When a fire is knocked down around and an opening up begins, areas where the lath has been burned must be examined for the presence of these columns. If detected, the locations above and below the fire must be checked immediately. Another one you don't see all the time, but you see sometimes, is dumbwaiter shafts are often used as voids for new electrical wiring or water pipes. The openings where these wire pipes enter into the apartment may not have been fire stopped, allowing for a shaft fire to enter an apartment or extend above. I actually had a fire in a old 3-story, 4-story walk-up apartment building that, we went there, we fought the fire on the bottom floor, put it out, everything was all good. And, a few hours later, luckily we had a fire watch there overnight. And about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, the fire watch called in and said, hey, we see some smoke, we think, coming off the roof of this building. And sure enough, the fire had promulgated up the chase, the waste pipe chase, onto the second and third floors, and then we had to get in there and find it and put it out. And the building's still standing. I drove by it about 20 minutes ago. So we did, and we had to call mutual aid for our nearest community with a ladder so we could work safely up on the roof and stuff.
I think this tip's a really pertinent tip. A lot of fires, most fires probably, are room and content fires, where it starts waste paper basket, smoking in the couch, kitchen.
Rechargeable batteries.
So the fire is inside the compartment, inside the room, if you will. And if the fire stays inside the room, then it's, I'm going to say, a simple matter, but it's a well rehearsed matter of coming in with your hose and putting the fire out. If the fire starts outside of the room in the structure itself, then that's almost like a different building, if you will, because it's burning between the interior and the exterior. So it's burning in the structure itself. And so you can have a fire that's going on in these concealed spaces. Or if your interior contents fire burns long enough, or it's in the cupboards where you've got openings behind the cupboards and it gets in, it can then burn in those concealed spaces. And so you may not even be aware that that's going on. You should be. Your experience should tell you that that's what's going on, and you should investigate what your spidey senses are telling you and know that this is going on. And it's a pretty pertinent tip, I think, for this week's episode, don't you think, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. And those spidey senses, like, we're trying to build those up. That's why we do the podcast, is to give you something in the back of your brain that goes like, hey, I think I heard about this somewhere before from those two old guys on that podcast. So I like it. It's awesome.
I come close to getting killed in a concealed space fire one time. And yeah,
Wow.
it was in an attic of a home under construction. And there was myself and the captain crawled into the attic through the attic hatch. And we crawled over the joist towards the fire, which was in a wood stove chimney at the other end. And it was blown in cellulose insulation. And at the time we were wearing Scott 2s with he said the positive pressure switch on them or whatever. Anyways,
Okay.
the
Ones,
regulator was pretty exposed. This is in the early 80s. And the regulator's plugged up with the blown in insulation, right? So we were like 30 feet into this attic that was very hot and absolutely zero visibility, trying to advance a line in there, and neither one of us could breathe. And we had to get out of there pretty damn quick and decide who was going first and who was going second down the hatchway. And it was close.
Surprised you didn't just step through the joists and go through the
Yeah,
ceiling.
we could have done that, but we hadn't actually rehearsed getting out of an attic. So
There's a drill for you. Jump through a couple of
yes, I would have
joists.
thrown my Scott pack underneath my armpit and stood up and
Right.
done a narrow
Descended. Broken
yeah
ankle.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Except
like it.
the attic was only about 4.5 feet high, so we were like we in the end we did what we should have done to start with. We got out the pike poles and ripped down all the brand new drywall and put the fire out. It all fell on.
See, you could have just jumped through the joist,
Yeah.
like I said. Now it's funny this comes to my mind, but I remember the first time I went into an attic walking on the joists with leather fire boots. I'd always worn rubber fire boots. That's what the fire department issued and stuff. But I was selling equipment and boots, so I got myself a pair of leather fire boots, and Hakes they were. And I remember going up into the attic and going like, "Holy cow! I can walk around up here." They were so much easier to walk in than the big rubber boots, and I just remember that as soon as I think of an attic and walking around an attic, I think of those
We we
boots. But
we were
anyway,
crawling on
uh,
all fours.
yeah, I was low, right?
That's
Not
how
high
the
enough. Yeah,
regulators got all full
yeah,
of this shit. Anyway, so
exactly.
safe
So,
spaces are dangerous,
yeah,
folks. Just saying.
yeah, be careful. Watch out for these voids and look for fires behind them. So, some current events here. We like to do a few of those. So, pressure's building for the U.S. Fire Service regarding the cost of fire apparatus and long backlogs. I know the Canadian Fire Chiefs Association has been holding meetings with municipalities and suppliers to try to come to some sort of, improved knowledge on this and what they can do to make these problems go away or be reduced. Tariffs is another problem that affects these things, maybe because these products come from both sides of the border, the material, the finished equipment, and stuff like that. The U.S. Senate, actually, this was advertised a couple of days ago on my LinkedIn account through a fire apparatus consultant named Jim Lyons down in the eastern United States. He passed it on. The U.S. Senate has demanded appearances from the three largest fire apparatus builders before the committee of the Senate to discuss costs and backlogs. We talked about this a few episodes ago in that one company, Rev Group, has bought up the lion's share, about half or so, of all the fire truck manufacturers in the States. So the Senate is kind of wondering if that's causing a problem that these three companies hold about 80% of the market between the three of them. And is this causing some of this problems and looking for solutions? So that's interesting. Anyway, we'll see what happens because fire truck prices are crazy right now. The another current event was the coroner's report was released on the line of duty deaths of two Quebec volunteer firefighters who were drowned during a water rescue a couple of years ago in a personal amphibious vehicle. So this is a wheeled vehicle that floats, and they went and they did a rescue. They had their turnout gear on. Because of the turnout gear,
Rapid water
they
too.
couldn't put PFDs on. They had PFDs, but they wouldn't go over their turnout gear. It was probably cold and wet, so that's why they're wearing their turnout gear. And somehow the vehicle wasn't adequate for the job at task, the water, and it flipped over, and both the firefighters died.
It was rapid flowing water.
Yeah.
So
And Argos don't
it was
go
a river.
very rapidly. And it had the tracks on it still, too, which I don't know if that impeded the progress or not. But anyway, we'll do an episode on that in the coming while after we put our heads together and translate it all and write a reasonable script. Glad to see it's.
Or we could do it. We could do it in
We
French.
could do it in French. That's right. Yeah, we could. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Might cut down on the listenership a little bit. Quebec actually is one of the few provinces that publishes the coroner's report fairly quickly. And we've done two or three of the Quebec ones. I've got another one waiting in the wings from the Montreal firefighter that died in a water rescue in the fall that I hope to do later this year. Anyway, two Spanish firefighters were killed during a recent fire of an electric vehicle in an underground parking garage after there was a crash or some sort of collision in the garage with this vehicle. It caught fire and emitted smoke, and the responding firefighters went in to put it out, and two of them were killed. One immediately, I believe, in some sort of a flashback or flashover or something, and then another one from the fumes. We don't have any reports yet, but that just happens. In my mind, that's the first firefighter killed by an EV. There were several Scottsdale firefighters that were injured in a battery storage explosion, but this is the first fatality. So unfortunately, that we'll watch that, monitor that one, and have a report for you at some point. There's also been numerous, like three or four, firefighter fatalities in recent weeks while responding in privately owned vehicles. So, firefighters that were responding to calls during extreme weather events or other events, helping their community, and they were killed in their private vehicles. This happens. It's the only solution in many situations. I agree, but we need to be extra vigilant when we're responding to calls in our private vehicles, not to get hurt or killed. Denis must have something for this one.
Yeah, if you're a fire chief or an officer in a fire department and you're volunteer firefighters, because generally speaking, that's what it is. Could be an off-duty career firefighter on callback. That's a
Mm-hmm.
possibility too, and I've seen some close calls on that. If your firefighters are not driving in accordance with conditions, for instance, you need to be all over them about that, because really in the end, it's arriving. It's more important to get there than it is to get there fast and dead. So essentially, that's just roughly really where this comes from. You need to be paying attention that when the public complains about how your firefighters are driving, um, and it's not always what's going on here, but if they do, you need to be all over that. You need to make sure that your firefighters know that their presence at an incident is important, but it's not essential.
Absolutely. Let's be safe, like we say on every episode, right? So, the Halifax Fire Department is introducing a cancer screening program for firefighters in January of 2026. So, that's a new initiative that the Halifax Council has voted to do improved screening for their firefighters. So, really good to see that. There's been a lot in the news lately about cancer and screening for firefighters in the States. Apparently, some of the cancer screening programs and tracking software and programs have been cut recently as part of, cost cutting with the federal government. And so that's a loss. I know we also lost the NIOSH program, where they were firefighter fatality investigation report that we get most of our material from. That has been cut at the moment as well, from what we hear. So these programs are essential for firefighters. The firefighter rate, I think I heard a thing, 8% higher than the general public for firefighters to catch cancer. So we need to make this happen. Okay, on to this week's episode. Now, this was all taken from the NIOSH Firefighter Fatality Investigation Program from a report 2005-13, where a 23-year-old male volunteer firefighter and a 39-year-old male assistant lieutenant died after a smoke explosion at a townhouse complex in Wyoming, Evanston, Wyoming, in April 18th of 2005. The city of Evanston is the seat of Uinta County, Wyoming. The population was about 12,359 residents in 2010. 10.33 square mile cities located on the border with Utah and is about 80 miles northeast of Salt Lake City. Combination department involved in the incident is comprised of 4 career firefighters and 55 volunteer firefighters who operate out of 4 stations. Interesting to have 4 stations in a small community like that. I'd like to know more about that. I'm not sure why they had 4 stations. Maybe it's a
Yeah, even the square mile is not that huge, right?
no. So interesting. Maybe they
10 square miles, like
maybe they couldn't afford to build
is
a
like
new station, so they use some rented facilities around town, maybe, or something like that. That's something some places do.
yeah, not sure what the reasoning behind that is. So it creates staffing challenges
For
on
sure.
your vehicles.
Hmm. So, training. The state of Wyoming does not require any specialized training for its firefighters. The fire department in question, though, requires that all firefighters receive their certification for Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2 through the protocol and testing provided by the state. Victim number 1 was NFPA certified level 1, level 2 certified, and had also received training for hazardous materials and had more than 2 years of firefighting experience. Victim number 2, this is the assistant lieutenant, was also NFPA level 1, level 2 certified, had received other training including hazmat, wildland firefighting, emergency medical technician, fire instructor 1, and flashover training. He had more than 11 years of firefighting experience. The units that were dispatched to the initial alarm, multiple units were dispatched. However, only those directly involved we're going to talk about in this report. The engine 1 was a captain, a driver, victim 1, and victim 2. So they were on the first responding engine. Engine 2 was a driver, operator, and 3 firefighters, so no officer. Ladder 1 was a lieutenant, a driver, and 2 firefighters. And then privately owned vehicle 1 was a lieutenant who became the incident commander, and another lieutenant, 2 more lieutenants that also arrived in their privately owned vehicles. The weather conditions were clear with strong winds gusting over 30 miles per hour and temperatures averaging 42 degrees Fahrenheit. So a typical spring day in the Midwest, if you will. The average humidity was 61%. Now, Denis, he went online and found pictures of the home and stuff. So it's right on the edge of town. So, it may be unprotected from the wind depending on the direction.
So this wind direction puts the wind squarely on the Charlie side of the house, and behind it's open fields. So yes, there would have been strong winds impacting on the Charlie side of the house, and there's some indication, although the report's not clear, there's some indication that what was going on the Charlie side might have um, caused the wind to blow into the building, I would say. We'll talk about that when we get to it.
Yeah, it's kind
So,
of a unique building. So it's just in the layout and how you approach it. So we'll talk more about that as we go.
so we're going to talk about the structure of the building. So this is a little bit complicated, and I'm going to try to paint a picture in your mind of what it looks like. So the structure was a tri-level townhouse that had 2 levels above ground and had a daylight or a lookout basement. So there were lower, small windows in the basement. And it's not really a 2-story. It's more like a 2.5, we would call that. And it was located at the northern end of a 5-unit townhouse complex. So there was a series of these, we'd call them semi-detached. Sometimes they're called that too, but there's a series of them in a row. There's 5 of them, and this one was on the very end. So it was on the delta end of this row of townhouses. So the residences were of ordinary construction, and they encompassed approximately 1,600 square feet total of floor space. They're not large. So there's a main floor, there's an upper floor that's like a half floor, and a basement below. And they were built in about the 1980s, so not new. The residents had smoke detectors, it says here, but smoke alarms really probably, that were working at the time of the fire. The area of the fire origin was later determined to be a storage area behind knee walls in the bedroom on the upper floor. The bedroom was the only major room on the second floor and was what's called a framed by room in attic trusses. So in other words, your roof trusses are they don't have the cross pieces in the middle. They're like scissor trusses. And so you're left with a space in the middle that is open and that you can occupy. You put a floor in and so forth. But it leaves these side walls, like knee walls, they're called. And for a lot of people, this was very common after the war. Houses were built this way after the Second World War. And so you're left with these knee walls, behind of which there is storage space most commonly. And so the construction allowed storage behind these knee walls. And these knee walls go up, and because of the trusses, it connects into the attic space that's over the top of the living area. So now you have a knee wall on one side connecting to an attic space above the living space, and then down to the knee wall on the other side. So essentially, your attic is wrapped around your living space. It's not on top of it necessarily. So this construction allowed the storage behind the knee walls to connect to the attic space, as I said, and the void space provided by the room and attic trusses allowed the bedroom to be surrounded by the fire and hot gases all the way around. And they presume that's exactly what happened. I will do a little bit of the virtual 360, which kind of enlarges upon what we just talked about. So upon arrival, firefighters found a large 2-story building, a single, because they're all connected together. But there were varying roof lines up and down because some of the units in this were 2.5-story, and some of them were 1.5-story. So the roof lines went up and down, kind of like a Christmas village.
Yeah, it is.
And all kinds of different roof lines and little dormers sticking out because, of course, anything in the attic areas with windows had dormers because you just had the sloped roof otherwise. And on the Alpha side, which, by the way, was not directly on the street, was across a playground field type area. The building was set well back on the Alpha side. There were entrance doors, and these were all above grade by about 4 feet or so, half a story, give or take. And there were up half a dozen or up to 8 wooden steps that led up to a small wooden porch that entered into the townhomes. So these would have been the main entrances on the Alpha side. So they're all raised entries with small porches made of wood and wooden steps leading up to them. So think as a firefighter, you're going to access the front door. There's not much room to work around on a porch that's like 4 foot by 4 foot or 6 foot by
Yeah,
6 foot.
you got to back
And
up to open the door. Yeah.
yeah, so you know what they're like. You open the door and the door swings across most of the porch, right? So
If there's a
there's
storm
not a lot.
door, I don't know. I'll have to look if there was storm doors or not. But
And yes, and when we talk about their operations that they did at this door, you'll see it was actually much worse than that. Anyway, there appeared to be a tall lookout basement below the first floor. So there are some windows in the basement area underneath the porch. And some units had basement windows on the alpha side, some didn't, depended on the height they were built out of the ground. So not only did these move, left and right and forward and back, they were all kind of uneven, if you will, each unit from one unit to the next. The end unit townhouse, which was on the delta end of this row of units, had almost no windows on the alpha side. There was one, I think, up in
in a dormer, yeah,
a peak dormer, like a nickel window,
yeah.
right? Small hex-sided window. That's all there was. Subsequent middle units had a first floor and a second floor and basement windows. The end units had a lower peak line because it was only like a story and a half, and it ended partway up the top floor of the building next to it on the Bravo side, and had a peak dormer which contained a small half moon window, like we talked about. So, like I said, we would call these a 1.5 story with basement. The Bravo exposure of the fire unit adjoined to a two-story unit, so another building that was a story higher. So with the peak of the roof and everything, the peak of the roof would have been halfway up this next story. So the Charlie side in the back appeared to have a first floor window, and this is based on the photographs that we can see in the report itself, which was to the left of the back door. And the back door was also raised with a small wooden porch and an access stair. And that back window appeared to be a kitchen window. So on the roof of the Charlie side end unit, there's also a large window, a skylight, mid-roof. So the Bravo unit exposure had a full second floor with large windows above the rear door, so there was some access above the roof line of the Bravo exposure. The Delta side of the fire unit featured a large window, but it was on the first floor only. It was not in the second story. There was a wooden fence across the rear of the Charlie side of the townhomes, and behind that fence there was a driveway of sorts, a wider area where you could drive vehicles in. In fact, one of the fire vehicles does respond in there.
So if you're not totally confused about the building before, you definitely are now. Yeah, sorry, we're just trying to paint a picture here. We will include some photographs on our social, Facebook, and
Bit of a
stuff
dog
like that.
spectrum.
But anyway, it's an odd building to pull up to because the doors are all on the same side, but they look different. And I suppose it was for visual appeal for sales to sell it. At approximately 15:10 hours, Central Dispatch received call of a structure fire and paged out the local fire department. A lieutenant who arrived in his personally owned vehicle at the rear of the structure assumed incident command at 15:14, so 4 minutes. There was Johnny on the spot. Just as Engine 1 arrived on scene. Engine 1 was the first apparatus to arrive on the scene and was advised by a neighbor that there were children inside the second floor of the fire unit. So this is game day here for the guys, right? They're going to go and rescue these kids. Engine 1 was positioned in front of the unit, which was on the east side of the complex, and reported to Central Dispatch that smoke was showing. The captain and both victims from Engine 1 prepared to make entry to search for the trapped children. The captain, who did not have his bunker gear, pulled the 200-foot inch and 3/4 pre-connect from Engine 1 as Victim 1 and Victim 2 donned their SCBA and prepared to make entry. The captain noticed small flames coming from the roof peak near the front side of the chimney chase on the Delta side of the structure. So there was a chimney chase that went from first floor all the way to the roof on the Delta side. It's quite visible looking at the home. And so he saw some flames there. He also noted light-colored smoke seeping from the shingles of the fire unit and smoke from the attic area of the adjacent unit that was the two-story beside it.
On the Bravo
On
side.
the Bravo side, yep.
You got smoke showing on the Delta side and smoke showing
on the Bravo side of the attic, which is the upstairs. The incident commander was staged at the rear of the structure, Charlie side, and assisted setting up Ladder 1, who had arrived on scene about 15:16, so quick response times. He noticed smoke coming from the two end units, and a small amount of flames were coming from the roof of the fire unit where the two units met, so right beside the Bravo exposure. The captain
Bravo Charlie.
Bravo Charlie.
That's right.
The captain returned to Engine 1 and charged the line. The victims made entry to the structure and proceeded to the second floor with the charged hose line. The captain then requested another lieutenant, who arrived in his personal vehicle to be the safety officer, to operate the pump. He also requested another firefighter to get positive pressure ventilation fan off Engine 1 and set it up at the front door of the unit, attempting to ventilate behind the firefighters to give them some visibility, I'm sure. The captain then took a 24-foot extension ladder from Engine 1 to the Delta side of the complex to find a second-floor window to assist in ventilation as his crew made entry through the front door. Because remember, a PPV, if you have an entrance, you must have a larger exit.
Right. So there's two issues there. They haven't ventilated this place, and they got a PPV pushing in the front. And remember the description of the porch entrance to the front door. It's small.
Yeah.
And you've got firefighters making entry there with lines and the PPV.
Well, maybe the PPV was on the ground, although it's weird because it's on an angle on that one, so that probably wouldn't work either.
Unlikely, I would say, that it would be effective from the ground.
Yeah.
Maybe, we can't tell.
The captain did not find a window on the second floor of the Delta side because it's that story-and-a-half kind of attic bedroom. But there was a skylight on the roof of the Charlie side near the fire unit. So it had this one of those opening big skylights to that bedroom up there that you could look out and open. He returned to the front of the structure and saw that victim 2 was at the front door requesting a thermal imaging camera. The captain retrieved the thermal imaging camera from Engine 1 and gave it to victim 2. Just after that, Engine 2 arrived at 15:18 hours. The other lieutenant, Lieutenant 2, who had responded in his private vehicle, joined a firefighter from Engine 2 to provide a backup at the front of the structure with another 1 3/4 line pre-connected off of Engine 1. Heavy brown smoke was filtering down the stairs and out the front door at this time.
So it sounds like they opened the door on the Charlie side.
Maybe.
This other crew to push the smoke
with
out
the wind.
The front door. But also, if the wind is blowing on that upper story, who knows? Maybe that skylight was partly open.
Could be.
Or just air infiltration through the side of the building. 30-mile-an-hour wind is pretty
windy.
breeze.
Yep.
Yeah, but brown smoke's not a good thing because there's always the risk that can light up. Anyway, around 15:20 hours, the IC, who was at the rear of the structure, received information and reports from bystanders, I guess other neighbors who lived there, that the kids were out of the fire unit. So there was nobody inside, no civilians inside. So he had that report that happened. So, and he presumably made a transmission. He transmitted this information, but it was never acknowledged by any of the crews that were at the front of the structure. So in other words, that captain who was walking
probably
around,
didn't hear it because the fan was running.
He was running the engine too. Conducting interior operations, they never heard that. So he made the broadcast, got no acknowledgement. So at this time, command was then transferred to another officer who was arriving on scene. That would be that second lieutenant who was coming in the POV. And the new IC did not have any direct involvement in the incident preceding the fatal event. So command transfer happened pretty close to the time that the backdraft occurred. The backup crew made their way to the porch stairs on the Alpha side, landing just inside the structure and radio for the line to be charged. And they did this around 15:21 hours. So they've been on scene 15, 16 minutes, right? The captain, who had come with Engine 1, was walking around to the back by the Delta side and had just passed the first floor window on the Delta side of the fire unit when the explosion blew out the window directly behind him. And that was noted by dispatch at around 15:22 hours. The captain immediately attempted to contact the entry team by radio. So these are two firefighters from Engine 1 who were upstairs, and didn't get a response.
So this is the Delta window, right? That's the only window on the Delta side. And as he's walking by it, boom, out it goes.
Behind him.
He's
walking towards Charlie, and the window behind him goes bang. And so he turns around and goes back around
Yeah.
to the Alpha side. So the captain returned to the front of the structure. And this captain doesn't have bunker gear on, remember that too. The captain returned to the front of the structure where the explosion had blown the backup crew out of the front door and down the porch stairs. And it's 4 or 5 feet we're talking about. So at that time, then thick black smoke and heavy fire are coming out the front door. So the fire's upstairs and it's being pushed down the stairs that are on the Bravo side of the interior, down the stairs and out the front door. And the front door is pretty much at the base of the stairs. So the backup crew picked themselves up and re-entered the structure and made it up about 3 steps up the stairs, interior stairs, attempted to follow the victim's hand line to the second floor. They encountered heat and flame conditions on the stairwell that were so intense that they were unable to proceed, and they then exited. They forced them to exit. Lieutenant 2 ordered firefighters to flow water then through the D side window, the Delta side window on the first floor, which by now was fully involved because it flashed over. And he then proceeded to the rear of the structure. Lieutenant 2, once he got to the Charlie side, met with the captain on that side and another firefighter at the rear. The captain informed them that they had 2 members down and possibly occupants. So at this time, still wasn't clear that there was nobody in the building. Lieutenant 2 and the firefighter advanced another 1 3/4 line from ladder 1, which is at the rear, and the crew proceeded through the kitchen and living room, so all the way from the Charlie side, all the way to the other side of the building on the ground floor, knocking down fires as they made their way to the stairs, which was in the Alpha Bravo corner. The crew was able to fight back the flames as they followed the victim's hand line up the stairs to a landing, which was just outside of the second floor bedroom. So this landing is on the Bravo side. The bedroom was completely involved, they could see, with heavy fire in the rafters above them. So it was a peaked, like a cathedral type rafter ceiling above them. As they knelt at the landing fighting these fires, Lieutenant number 2 could hear a low air alarm sounding. So they were able to knock down the fire in the rafters in the main part of that bedroom and managed to restore some visibility. So there must have been fire venting somewhere. Maybe that skylight let go, I don't know. They immediately then spotted victim number 1's boots inside the room and just to their left. So they're looking into the room, just to their left, they could see his boots. Victim 1, he was prone, in other words, lying out, and his feet were towards them. He had his gloves removed, and the tick was sitting next to him.
Note, it's believed that the victims were searching for trapped children, and they opened the door in the window dormer leading to the storage area behind the wall. The seat of the fire was in the storage area just behind the door or on the west side of the bedroom, which was the wind side, the Charlie
And
side.
that's the Charlie. Yeah.
It is believed that the fire was throughout the entire storage area. The attic and the storage areas on both sides of the room were connected by voids space from the design of the one-room in-room attic truss. The bedroom was charged with smoke, and the wind was blowing from the west to east in the excess of 30 miles per hour. According to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and State Fire Marshal, when the door was opened, the fire blew into the room and instantaneously ignited smoke, causing an explosion. After approximately 15 minutes after the explosion, additional firefighters assisted the rescue crew to remove victim 1 and place him in an ambulance. Crew members re-entered and found victim number 2 in the northeast corner of the bedroom. They removed victim 2 and placed him in an ambulance. Both victims were transported to local hospital and pronounced dead. The cause of death was the medical examiner lists the cause for both victims as smoke inhalation and thermal burns to over 50% of their bodies. I just got to say, like, this is exactly what most of us would do in this case, except for the PPV fan. You would, and of course they went in against the wind, which is a big problem. That's probably why that other crew from the Charlie side did better, because they had the wind at their backs going into the kitchen and the living room and then up the stairs with the fire venting horizontally, possibly out and vertically. But besides going in on the Alpha side, which is we're creatures of habit, we always do that for some reason. If they would have went with their wind at their back, they probably would have got up there at least, and things might have been different. Anyway, go ahead, Denny.
So from the position of the two firefighters that were found, they weren't together. They were split up, and one of them was found near the bed. So maybe he was doing a search for
Maybe a
the,
tick
the
tick
children.
led search, and then the other
Yeah,
guy, while I'm
maybe.
standing here watching, I'll open this door.
Yeah. So it doesn't. To me, it does. It's not clear that they recognized the risks of the particular structure they were in, and that the fire was really all around them.
Yeah, I wouldn't
And
have clued in on that either. Looking at the building,
and and the visibility when they entered this room to do the search, you can't you can't believe that it was zero visibility in extreme heat. It couldn't have
no,
been. They probably would not have gone in.
right.
So the conditions when they entered probably were tenable. I mean, we've all been in these situations if you've had any firefighting experience, that you've got a few minutes where you can do things and you quickly do them and then get out.
Especially if
And they
there's
were probably,
victims, they think there's two children in there.
yeah,
They're gonna do absolutely everything they can to find those kids.
yeah, going to do a quick primary. So, and then they got caught by a flashover probably because you got a lot of brown smoke, a lot of combustibles in that, and that's going to be a problem. Yeah. Anyway, we're going to talk about recommendations. So recommendation 1, fire departments should develop and enforce standard operating procedures for structural firefighting that include, but are not limited to, incident command system, accountability, ventilation, and emergency evacuation. So SOPs are organizational directives, we should all know that, and or plans that establish how the organization will react in various situations to increase the effectiveness and ensure the safety of the firefighting team. Of course, SOPs are only good if you manage to predict, for instance, the situations that you're going to be in. And generally speaking, those would be based upon the risk profile in your community. So if you have a number of these buildings and with these types of attic come occupied areas, one of the risks of that is going to be a concealed fire in that area, and you should have SOPs on that.
And wind-driven
Anyway,
fire. You're in Wyoming. You're going to get wind-driven fire.
that's right. So the ICS in this incident functions were not formally assigned. There was no formal ICS, although they said that there was an incident commander. He wasn't operating in that mode. Accountability. At this incident, members who were arriving without reporting to the IC for accountability. Accountability wasn't set up until after the incident occurred, after the backdraft. Ventilation. Smoke, heat, and gases should be vented above a fire to eliminate conditions for a flashover, or in this incident, what ATF was calling an explosion. Flashover, we know it as. Yeah. Open high before you open low.
And
That's not what
accountability,
they.
it talks about, I want to talk about that accountability one. Like, that doesn't have to be complex. I mean, the little Lamicoid tags, you have a couple of them on a piece of Velcro on your helmet, a red one and a yellow one, and you take it off and you put it on the truck or the pump panel somewhere so that at least you know who's there. Firefighter Prevo and firefighter Prevo. Oh, that'd be confusing. Lucky we're not on the same department. But, it doesn't have to be a complex system. It's just that so you know who's inside and who's on air, etc.
Particularly if your response profile is similar to this department. It's a combination department, but the trucks are not fully staffed, clearly. I mean, there's only like 2 people, 3 on the first in engine, and the one guy that was on the engine wasn't even on duty that day.
No.
So hanging around the station for some reason, maybe he was there for a meeting and got on the truck. So the aerial that came to the Charlie side, 2 members on board. So they were very much dependent on other firefighters arriving in their POVs, personal operated vehicles, to beef up the staffing. And it tells you in here through the narrative, for instance, that the Charlie side and the Alpha side were not really coordinating what they were doing. And there's accountability would go a long ways towards knowing who was where and who's doing what. Emergency evacuation is one of the other things that there should be SOPs for. There's several ways this communication can be done. The 2 most common methods are to broadcast a radio message ordering all firefighters to evacuate, and or sounding an audible warning device like an air horn on the apparatus at the fire scene for an extended period of time. And SOPs should identify the types of emergency evacuation signals that will be used by the fire department. So why are they talking about an SOP for evacuation? Because they got a working fire and no victims inside, The only people at risk were the firefighters. And so all the signs were is that you had a fire in the attic in the roofing area because that's where all the smoke and everything was going on, and there was nobody inside. So how would you get people out? How would you sound an evacuation? And I guess they determined through the investigation that there was no SOP for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at this, the window's blown out. They say the kids are out of the house. It's probably time to get our guys out, regroup, and make a new strategy. That's what I'm thinking now. I'm a little bit more conservative than some other firefighters that would say, no, we got to be in there. We're ready for this. But again, they didn't have even a plan or a signal. So partly why this recommendation is probably there. The next recommendation is that the fire department should ensure that incident command completes a size-up of the incident and continuously evaluates the risk versus benefit during the entire operation. The discussion around that recommendation is that the information obtained from a complete size-up lays the foundation for the entire operation. A proper size-up begins from the moment the alarm is received and continues until the fire is under control. In this incident, a 360-degree walk around of the structure was never conducted by the first arriving officer who was acting as the incident commander. The first arriving apparatus, Engine 1, was positioned in front of the structure and had received information from a neighbor that children were trapped on the second floor of the fire unit. The officer from Engine 1 took control of operations in the front of the structure and immediately deployed his crew in an attempt to locate and rescue the children. While the IC was pulling a supply line hose for the aerial water tower operations, so obviously they were thinking it's going to get serious, he received confirmation that the children were out of the fire unit. The incident commander was unaware that any interior operations occurring in the front of the structure.
So the IC was on the Charlie side, and the entry was on the Alpha side.
Okay, so he was IC at the rear, right?
Yeah.
So he was unaware that the guys were inside. Because they didn't go entry being made on the radio or water on the fire or anything like that. Yeah.
We just did another episode. We're very similar.
Same thing. Okay, attack team 1 is going to the second floor on the radio.
Yeah, 2 fire departments fighting the same fire, like 2 separate fires.
Exactly, Aberdeen. So while the IC was pulling that supply line for the ladder, he received confirmation that children were out of the fire unit. The IC was unaware of any firefighting operations occurring in the front of the structure. Therefore, he didn't make any tactical changes in the operation. He radioed that the children were out of the structure at 15-20 hours, but did not receive confirmation of his transmission. No one heard it. The officer from Engine 1 was charging the pump, retrieving gear for the victims, and attempting to ventilate the structure. He did not receive the transmission.
He's not acting as an officer. He's acting as a pump operator, completely buried in tasks, let alone tactics.
Yeah.
So you can see how communications could certainly get missed. Yeah. How the guys inside didn't hear it either and or acknowledge it.
And
we don't know if they heard it, but they certainly didn't acknowledge it. So you got to question whether the transmission was ever actually made. We had another incident where there was important information transmitted, except that the radio, in fact, was turned off.
Right, but here dispatch must have had a record. Somehow they knew what time it came through. Yeah. So, but this is when I was deputy chief. This was one of the most frequent drills I would do. Was that basic first 10 minutes? Okay, because at 3 a.m, when the alarm comes in and you're half awake, you need to be able to do these basic steps by rote. Catching the hydrant, charging a line, getting your BA on, grabbing the tick when you go inside, all and reporting it all on the radio so that everybody else knows what's going on. We used to do this over and over. I called it basic setup, and just the first 10 minutes of an evolution, and do it over and over again, and then throw a monkey wrench into it. The truck won't pump, or the hose line is broken, or whatever, so that people would have to deal with a problem.
And I know this sounds silly for some folks, and they don't believe this, but communications training is critical. It's very important. So what are the components of communications? The components of communication is the person who's transmitting a message, and it's being received by the receiver, and the receiver receives and understands the message. And how does the transmitter know that it was received and understood? Because you get feedback. He responds back and encapsulates the important parts of the message. Yes, message received, evacuating, or message received, flow water, message received, attacking, something. if you don't get feedback, you've got to consider that your message didn't get out.
Absolutely. Lucky Doug and Dirk aren't on here because they'd be complaining about having to do readbacks. But readbacks are
Well, I can do it pretty
critical.
quick, and so can.
Yep, I could do it. So,
Anyway, fire departments, this is recommendation 3. Fire departments should ensure that adequate numbers of staff are available to immediately respond to emergency incidents. I think there were 11 or 12 firefighters on scene at this particular incident, but they did not all get there in the beginning.
mhm.
They were not there from the beginning when the critical decisions were made. Anyway, for low hazard, and I say this in quotation marks, occupancies, example 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings. I don't like to call family dwellings as low
No, because
hazard.
it's high risk. Yeah, or high. It's the hazard is the people. Yeah,
Yeah, they're they're lower than a fire in a garbage can, and they're lower than maybe a field
yeah,
fire, but fire in a shed. But they're not zero risk by any means. Anyway, NFPA and also NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, recommends the following initial attack response: at least 2 pumpers, 1 ladder, or a combination apparatus with equivalent capabilities. You can also find this through fire underwriters. They have a pretty good formula for this too. 1 chief officer, or at least an officer in charge, right? And other specialized apparatuses might be needed or available based on the risk involved, right? Anyway, not fewer than 12 firefighters and 1 chief officers. So like I always say, 12 to
yeah,
14 on scene. This is on scene within the first minute or two of the first units arriving on scene, not 30 minutes later in their personal vehicle. So that's the critical thing, is to get them on scene, enough people, and early, not late. At this incident, there were 11 firefighters and the incident commander on the scene. The captain was responding on his day off and did not have any gear on the engine to effectively assist with fireground operations. I'm not sure what his thoughts on that were. The ladder truck responded with only the driver, operator, and 2 firefighters, which then forced the IC to assist with setting up their truck for aerial operations. They didn't have enough staffing. The fire apparatus that were staffed below minimum requirements can result in less effective and ultimately unsafe firefighting conditions. NIST has done extensive studies on this. They've run drills with 2 firefighters, 3 firefighters, 4 firefighters, 5 firefighters. They've compared how complete the operations, how far the crews can take operations, how long it takes them, and whether they can even be done. So, got to read this stuff,
yeah.
guys,
One of my
when you make.
one of my friends, who's a full-time firefighter paramedic in a nearby metropolitan area, to me, posted on Facebook yesterday or today because the city's having staffing issues and overtime issues and stuff. So they've been browning out a station, staffing one station with only 2 people for the engine. So and he posted this exact thing from NIST today about the percentages that you can do and the risk of injury and all that kind of stuff. And low staffing equals firefighter fatalities. I don't care how many times I do this podcast, it comes up over and over again.
It does, depending on your tactics. So the 2 standards that the 2 National Fire Protection Association NFPA standards that address this directly are 1720, which is for career staffed fire services, and 1710.
1710 for career, 1720 for combination part time.
Correct. Thank you for that. And the 1720 for volunteer-based services or rural services does not address adequate staffing for responding and entering and doing rescue uh, on an occupancy like a house, for instance. It doesn't provide enough for that. So you have to adjust your tactics accordingly. So if you've got 4 firefighters arriving in 10 minutes, for instance, at a remote, or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, or whatever the case may be, at a remote incident, which is allowed under 1720, then you can't expect these people to be going and doing interior rescue and firefighting at the same time. So you need to adjust your tactics, and your tactics need to be adjusted to exterior only, probably, or whatever the case may be, that you can manage with your staffing until such time as your staffing becomes adequate. In this case, at least 14 people, but likely by then you've not really got any option for going interior. But that's just the way it is. That's part of your district. You need to know that.
Recommendation number 4. Fire department should ensure that the incident commander maintains the role of director of fireground operations and does not become directly involved in firefighting operations. Like Denny just said, you have to be able to command and see the whole picture. If you're connecting a hose or running a pump, it's really next to impossible to be command as well, especially if there's more than, a few firefighters there doing work. In the discussion of this recommendation, according to NFPA 1720, like we just mentioned, the responsibility for assigning fire companies at an emergency belongs to the incident commander, who establishes priorities and assigns units based on the identified objectives. In addition to conducting initial size up, the IC must maintain an awareness of the location and function of all companies or units at the incident, initiate and maintain accountability and control communications for the tactical, command, and emergency traffic channels for the incident. To effectively coordinate and direct firefighting operations on the scene, it is essential that adequate staff are available for immediate response to ensure the incident command is not required to become involved in firefighting efforts. At this incident, the incident commander was involved in non-command functions such as pulling a supply hose and helping set up the ladder truck.
And even more fundamentally, when Engine 1 arrived, they had 2 firefighters on board with all their gear ready to do firefighting, and one other guy, a captain, who had none of that stuff. So they never even matched 2 in and 2 out, which is like really basic level, uh, not enough staffing really to do anything. But they didn't even meet 2 in 2 out
That's right.
until the ladder company arrived. So
Which, for rescuing victims inside the building, I can see them doing that. I can see that happening.
yep,
But at least 2 in, 2 out
yep,
would have provided commander and a pump operator. So they might have seen the
yep,
signs and caused an evacuation earlier, or gotten the information from the neighbor earlier that the kids were out.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. It affected their
But
response.
because this is such a common incident in North America, a common type of community, a common type of building, and a common type of fire department response, it's really applicable to this podcast in that these are the ones we got to watch out for. 3 in the afternoon, and hey, I was a volunteer firefighter here for 25 years in another town. Wow, a call. Let's go. We're going to save, we're going to do our job, what I've been training for, put my skills to use. 3 in the afternoon, sunny day, perfect. And then disaster strikes.
Yeah. But we used to always have these discussions because, I was chief in departments where, volunteers arriving at the station, and getting on the trucks. Like, do you wait until you have a full crew or do you roll with a less than
Big
full crew?
argument. Yep.
How long do you wait? Oh, we're going to have to wait another minute for, the number 4 guy to show up. Well, you're going to need the number 4 guy at the incident. Is he going to drive there faster and safer in his personal vehicle than you are in the fire truck? That's a question you got to ask yourself. Now, if he's got to drive all the way across town to get to your fire hall, then to turn around and drive all halfway back across town to get to the fire scene, that doesn't make sense. But if you got IM responding or some other program like that, and you know that he's going to meet you on scene, and through accountability, you can properly join up and make a team, well, then you've got that problem solved. But you got to work all this out beforehand. And we've had lots and lots of discussions and about whether you man adequately. And another thing, and ran into this with career staffing, for instance, if you're running career staffing out of multiple stations and you got 2, 3 on a truck, you really can't do a lot until you assemble all of your vehicles. And I did a major study in our head actually, we hired a contractor to do it. And we looked at what's the best way to assemble crews on scene, not just about response time, first truck on scene, because first truck on scene with 2 guys is not helpful unless it's a medical. If it's for anything else that requires staffing, you need more staffing. So in other words, you're waiting for the last truck to arrive in many cases that brings you your adequate staffing. So maybe you're better to have fewer stations with better staffing profiles because if you've got traffic lights and you've got control systems, you've got proper vehicles, you've got proper roads, you can respond relatively quickly and probably get more people on scene sooner. And we proved that statistically that we could actually do that with fewer stations. Anyway, it's something you need to look at, and it's a discussion around the table that will be going on long after I'm gone.
Exactly. Where were we?
Recommendation 5. Fire department should ensure the incident commander is clearly identified as the only individual with overall authority for management of all activities at an incident. Why, Paul?
Because we have to know what's going on, front, rear, all four sides, and accountable. That's your job. Safety of the firefighters.
Yeah. And clearly identified so that if there are civilians or other persons in the area who have information and they want to relay to the fire department, they know who to see, not try to catch some captain that's zooming by, stretching a hose, or zooming back in the other direction with a tick camera, or zooming in the other direction to adjust the knob on the pump panel, or like you could see why people wouldn't be able to bring key information to that person. So that's some of the reasons that you want to do this. And when the gas company arrives, they need to know who to talk to. The police officer arrives, who they're going to talk to. They're just going to grab some guy and say, hey,
Vest.
Yeah.
Vest
So
and the green flashing light.
Anyway, NFPA 1561 states there should be one clearly identifiable incident commander for the duration of the incident, from the arrival of the first emergency services organization until the incident is terminated. Not the same person, but the position
Right.
must exist. This incident has identified an IC, but command was never established. So there was never anybody who went on the radio and says, I am so-and-so, I am in command. That didn't happen, apparently. Nor was there a plan ever developed. It talks about, for instance, that the guys in the back, didn't know they were attacking from the front, so they didn't change their tactics. Well, who knew what their tactics were? Because they didn't communicate that. And if they had have communicated that, then even the guys on the Alpha side in Engine 1 would have known, or vice versa. So therefore, uncoordinated operations were taking place. The guys on the Alpha side were fighting their fire, and the guys on the Charlie side were fighting their fire. An effective fireground operation revolves around the one IC who develops and coordinates tactical decisions with all personnel in the fireground. You've got to follow the plan, but there has to be a plan. Companies responding as assigned must ensure that they report to the IC to establish a unified command system. That's probably not the right term, because unified command means something different. But if there is no command, or if there are multiple commands, fireground operations can quickly break down. Now, you don't invent all of this when you're at the fire. SOPs should be well established. In many cases, like Paul said, there's certain tasks that are done automatically or expected to be done automatically. Like the aerial at the rear of a working fire drove right past the fire hydrant to get to the back of the incident. So did they stop to drop a line, as a supply line, as they went in, or did they detail somebody off to drag the line back to hook into the hydrant? So you need to have SOPs on all of those things. You need to work all of that out beforehand. Recommendation 6, Paul.
Fire departments should ensure that firefighters are trained to identify truss roof systems and their potential hazards. The discussion here is that trusses come in many sizes, shapes, and designs. It is important that firefighters are able to identify them and the dangers they may pose. Trusses normally consist of wood, but may also be constructed of various types of metals. Truss systems that have bottom cords covered with a ceiling create a void space between the ceiling and the roof. During this fire, this void space could conceal smoke and fire, accumulate hot gases, and allow rapid fire spread. Once the burning of a truss has been confirmed, defensive firefighting tactics should be used. And this home, it does look like a 1.5 story wartime house with a dormer and a window in the front, beside one that's a 2-story house. So it is confusing, but you could definitely suspect if they had to go to the second floor. Someone told them the kids were on the second floor. So then obviously that second floor has attic space around it and above it. Typical residential construction using roof trusses creates a void space between the roof and the ceiling. The roof of the structure involved in this incident was built with an in-room attic truss. An in-room attic truss system has a room framed into the void space typically created between the roof and the ceiling, placing the void space around the entire room. In this incident, the attic fire was not only overhead, but it surrounded the victims as they conducted a search in the upstairs bedroom. Firefighters should be provided with training to identify the different types of truss systems and the potential hazards in a fire. Training to identify trust buildings should be part of the fire department's pre-fire planning or inspections. It's actually a nice little development. There's like 3 or 4 of these 5-unit buildings in this development. So they should have known it was there, and they should have maybe seen it. But I mean, like Brannigan says, know your enemy. The building's your enemy, and you need to know it. And so, we have to dedicate ourselves as firefighters. Like I went ahead, and I think Jenny did too. I became a fire inspector and a fire investigator, and I try to learn as much as I can possibly learn to do my job effectively as a firefighter. So that's why. So, they have an article here that talks about, and if any, I'll go ahead if you want. Firefighter in memoriam. Firefighter Jacob Earl Cook, age 23, was a 2-year member of the fire department. He was an avid hunter, taxidermist, and outdoorsman. Jake was married just 3 short weeks before his death. Assistant Lieutenant Robert Perdue Henderson, age 39, was an 11-year member of the Evanston Fire Department. He'd served his country for 8 years in the U.S. Army, reaching the rank of sergeant, and was a veteran of Desert Storm. He was honored twice as a Firefighter of the Year. His work as an emergency medical technician and firefighter opened doors for him to volunteer as a medic for the 2002 Winter Olympics, participate in the Space Shuttle Columbia recovery operation, and work many western forest wildland fires. Robert will also be greatly missed at the Evanston Post Office, where he worked for the last 10 years. He's survived by his wife of 15 years and 3 children. And I just wrote a little note here as we were talking there, Denis. We're not slamming these guys. We're not Monday morning quarterbacking. That's what it sounds like. But we have to expose the issues. We have to honor these firefighters' lives that were, don't let them be lost in vain. We need to learn from them so it doesn't happen again. Because as was said years ago at one of the NIOSH, conferences, we keep killing firefighters the same way over and over. So we need to pay attention to the lessons learned and change our behavior for them, which is why we do the podcast.
Yeah, and fire departments and fire chiefs and officers need to imagine what can go wrong and see if it's likely and try to figure out a way to ameliorate that or prevent that from happening, and have plans and procedures in place and training in place to help to deal with those situations. Because when you go to a fire and everything goes well and goes easily, those aren't the fires that teach you things for the most part. So you need to be paying attention to the incidents that are affecting other folks, learning from those, and look at your districts and understand where things can go wrong for you, and do what it takes to be ready for those days, because they're coming for sure. They may not come to you, but they're going to come to somebody in your department at some point.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of the Emergency Traffic Podcast. We hope that you find these informative and educational, and please tell a friend. Now, let's be safe out there.
Take care every day.